Good afternoon and welcome to the third edition of the International Conference on Education and Photography. This year's theme regards ethical shifts in photography. The importance of this topic was well outlined already in this morning by Klaus Frucknis, by our keynote speaker Sarker Protik, and of course by all the speakers. The afternoon session focuses on professional learning settings, photography and entrepreneurship. I'm Steve Bisson, co-founder of Blurring the Lines, a program fostering talent and network in visual cultures. This conference represents one of the main activities we carry out every year. Today I will be the moderator of this session. But before, let me introduce and officially launch the new edition of the Catalogue of Blurring the Lines, which aims to award every year a selection of graduation works from different schools worldwide. This year's publication, it's our fourth edition, collects 36 projects selected from 135 applicants submitted by almost 40 schools and 24 countries involved. The catalogue is an important milestone for our activity, but it's also a huge work. And for this, I would like to thank the curatorial team who made it possible. Starting from the guest curator, Amak Mahmoudian, and Lisanne Van Appen, and Photodoc, and John Fleetwood, who have been collaborating with us for some years now. This year, we also involved the winners of the last edition of Blurring the Lines. Ragnar Armaric, Fembinkoji Hlashvayo, and Riti Sengupta contributed to the challenging jury phase. And with them, our friends from the European Cultural Centers, and in particular Elena Volpato, Berenice Freitag, and Suzanne van der Borg. Thanks to Faservice for printing the book in time, and Urbanautica for being the publisher. Finally, thank you to all the schools, teachers, and students that participated to last year's call for projects. Thanks for submitting your work. Thanks for joining this network. Thanks for believing in our project. My thanks go to all of them, of course. I'd like to remind you that from today, the catalog will be available online and for free on the platform of Academia. And let me now quickly introduce then the first speaker of our afternoon session. Let me welcome Laura Davì. Laura Davì started working in publishing in the early 90s. She's a professional journalist and has been working as an independent photo editor for many years. Her experience in publishing has allowed her to get to know the world of magazines, and her curiosity has drawn her close to the kind of photography that is closer to art. According to Laura, the photo editor's job is complex and articulate, and it cannot be improvised, as it requires a vast visual culture, plus knowledge of history and contemporary photography. It takes good vision and prevision skills. Success challenges you to start from an idea and turn it into a project. It means looking into others' minds, seeing beyond that, sometimes being provocative to trigger a reaction. Drawing inspiration from Bruno Munari's method and observation and from Gianni Rodari's use of words, Laura Davì leads photographers to discovery of the new languages of editing. In 2019 and 2020, she led two of her artists to win the Canon Young Photographers Award, which aims at discovering and recognizing young Italian photographers' experimentation and new expressive ways. Let me welcome Laura Davì. Thanks for being on board with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you to you. I am gonna share my screen. Sorry. As always. I can manage very well. Okay. I want to thank Steve Bisson, you, Blurring the Lines, Urbanautica, Paris College of Art and Klaus Frucknis, and European Cultural Center, especially Elena Volpato, for inviting me to this incredible conference. And Sara Danieli and Stella for helping me with translations to English. I'm a photo editor working in magazines, schools, exhibitions, festivals, and so on from the beginning of the 19th. I don't want to bore you telling my personal experiences. I know you have studied new photography, post-photography, mixed media, appropriation, ecology of images, copyrights, etc. But I want to focus my conversation in another direction. Many times we listen to people explain to us their ethical point of view, speaking of cheap systems. Many times we've seen very different application of their wonderful words in their practice activities. I mean, there is often a great distance from words to actions. This subtitle, Did You Say Good Morning This Morning, wants to bring our ethical thinking back to our behavior and personal approach to this theme. I've asked people I work with or I esteem, what is ethics and which is the way this personal view informs their artistic practice. Sparsa colligo, it's Latin. Alessio Koser, his project Where Are Gone Basalia's Dreams is on mental insanity, is one of his personal projects. He's a photojournalist. He quotes Italo Calvino, it's impossible not interpret as well as we refrain from thinking. Alessio Koser photographs classically, but we begin to have clues. He uses two important words, chance and responsibility. Francesco Rucci works with reportage. We see a portrait of a worker. He speaks about the reality itself of a situation, what is it? And speaks of a person and her truth in the context. His workers are staged. So we have other themes to think about. I work with Davide Bertuccio with happiness and many satisfactions. He is very classical and revolutionary in the same time. His doubts are about staged photography. As a photojournalist, it's a good question. He says everything has to be at his proper place and that he doesn't want to tamper with reality. What could it be a proper place? And what does it mean not tampering with reality when neuroscientists tell us that we rebuild reality at every glance, reinventing, for example, what we are missing in our blind point? Think about this. Alex Pardi tells us there is no inherent truth in photography as it is, but a subjective point of view. He uses photography like a novelist uses words, he said. He brings a good argument. A staged photograph can be used ethically and a straight one unethically. It's interesting. Peter van Agtmael, I don't know if this is correct, is a manual photographer. says truth and objectivity are very nice words, but remain aspirational. And Ani Farid can say after her studies that humans are remarkably inept at telling which images are fakes and which are real. I agree with Luca Panaro when he says he believes that the good lies in the deepening and the evil in the superficiality. And when he reminds us that photography, from its origins, has shown itself to the world as an ambiguous invention that is susceptible to different interpretations, and that intentions must be judged considering this ambiguity. Everything that is possible is real. This is Bach. We have now my beloved Diana Del Franco, a very talented young woman from Naples. Here is her thesis work, Fake Plastic Tree. Through metaphors, she intended to show an individual mental condition, but also a global situation without screaming it, where the real world changes into simple images become real beings, quoting Guy Debord. I invite you to read the philosopher, sociologist, and intellectual Edgar Morin's work. He says there are three directions of ethics: individual, social, and the one that includes everyone, the human species entirely. Following an ethical direction means to look at reason in passion, and passion in reason, reason and passion. These three directions seem to be present in Valentina Roffredo, Nosy in the Wild, curated by Chiara Caratti, a dear friend, a photo editor I work with. Chiara thinks ethics questions the viewer to improve the world we live in. It helps to reveal unknown aspects. Loffredo translated in a video game her previous images questioning digital identities. Yes, the exhibitions created by Chiara consisted of video games, mixed media. It's impossible to me not to remember Zygmunt Bauman, liquid surveillance maybe. Luciano Floridi, thoughts about on life and his information ethics. And Byung-Chul Ang, thoughts about our world. For example, the smartphone is the cult object of digital domination. Well, we all know very classical definition of photography as window and mirror. Ilaria Biento's artistic research is an introspective immersion in the real meaning of this word because she has chosen the sea as her element. Her Cardia exhibit, by the way, was the one I've loved the most during last year, but okay. She says it's urgent to create a harmonious relationship between an external landscape and an inner world. According to Ilaria, ethics is a practice of love and balance between oneself and the universe. Federico Vespignani works differently. He works with reportage in a very personal way. I see people's hope in very difficult situations and develop with these people a relationship of mutual trust. Federico looks for an intimate, deeper, closer, and respectful way to show us the complex theme of traumas and violence in Central America. He suggests that there is a possibility for anyone, even for the ones that committed crimes. He forces us to renew our way of looking. Are we able to do this? What we see, and seeing is changing is from a poem, Planetarium, by Adrian Rich. And it is changing, however, only when we change the way we look, change our tools for looking, be they physical instruments, the microscope and the telescope, or instruments of the mind. Chiara Marletto is a physicist at the University of Oxford, is working toward a meta theory deeper than general relativity, subtler than quantum mechanics. Marco Barbieri is a shy, talented photographer, points his search especially on the landscape. Here is an ongoing project of the territory where he lives. He thinks that every attempt to represent the landscape translates into a natural representation of ourselves. He quotes Borges and speaks about moral principles, reciprocity, and a set of values and symbols regarding humanity. Think about the word hope that Bauman has left us. Hope alongside courage and will, a mundane, common weapon that is too seldom used. Raffaele Vertaldi is one of the best photo editors we have in Italy, I think. He says ethics is not an option that can be switched on or off depending on the context. He wants to have a cultural and social bearing rather than projects that flirt with fashions and trends. Here is an installation view of Nuova Milano Social Club by the photographer Fabrizio Annibali, exhibited in a farmhouse confiscated from the mafia in Milan. Elena Franco is an architect, also working with photography. Here we see a picture of a project sulla soglia dei mondi perduti. She wants to be empathetic with places and communities, trying to suggest interpretations that can activate projects that will be led by others, only initiated or encouraged by her work. Erika Romano sees art as a way to redemption and reconstruction in the meantime, in individual and in a social way. Here is a project by Claudia Gori, Conversus, that is a dialogue between an ancient, precious place, almost forgotten, revitalized and reinterpreted by the contemporary reading of the work made by the photographer. Ethics is related to respect, says Federica Cocciro. She published a book, The Long Goodbye, about the end of life and euthanasia. She asked herself a lot of moral questions, having to challenge with very personal, difficult and sorrowful situations. She has chosen to go by subtractions and to avoid the spectacle of the pain. A fundamental question is, would it be okay if I was treated like that? Ethic is a question of empathy and respect, and is fluid, as we see, being to be adapted to various situations. Gian Giacomo Rocco di Torre Padula goes further, asking us to be critical toward our thinking, because you are not the others. You may try to figure out what is the best for them, but you are not definitely in their shoes. In neurology, this is the theory of mind. Understanding understanding the others is challenging. YOLO is a metaphor of a murderer by the police by 13 shots at the shoulder of L'Aqua McDonald's.
Good.
Pietro Baroni, this is a video. Words of Love is a project that wants to report how sexism and machismo in our society start from language. Making art for Pietro is to make politics, and without ethics, you can't do politics. Ethics also means coherence, that actions follow thoughts, and to have empathy. The same of Federica, of Gian Giacomo, and others here. This is Dopamine by Giulia Iacolutti. Giulia says, I consider it ethical to stimulate the public to propose new poetical ways to look at reality, working on narratives, countering stereotypes dominating our culture, which tend to flatten everything. Art, touching the deepest chords of human nature, becomes a means for politics, hoping something will change through an emotion. Elena Vaninetti, from her curatorial point of view, carefully checked that the artistic work is the result of respectful process, and that the artist has the right motivations, approach, and sensitivity. But she points out, we notice that the final result, the offer to the audience, often lacks significant content. I agree. Let me end with a provocative question by Valeria Pierini. Ethics, to me, is staying consistent with my thinking and my being without selling me out in any way, economical or emotional, or trying to do what works the most to be present. So, quanto sei ricattabile? How much are you blackmailable? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Laura, for your wide excursus that has, I believe, shown us that different visual modalities exist to pursue an ethical perspective within our practice, within our artistic practice in this case. So ethics not as a constraint, but rather as a further motivation to enrich our discourse. And also, you show us and remember maybe us that we have a very vast and rich literature to count on when we want to, deepen our works and thoughts. So thanks again for your very interesting excursus, Laura. So let me now introduce you to our second speaker. Her name is Laura Gabrielaitytė-Kazulėnienė. I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Well, Laura is a cultural attaché of Lithuania to the Italian Republic and has contributed to implement various international collaboration and co-creative projects, residency and exchange programs, tours, fairs, and festivals across the world. Laura has a bachelor's degree in cultural history and anthropology and a master's degree in heritage protection. She studied art history in the University of Trieste, and since then, Italy has become the second home for her and the family. Before taking the job at the embassy for a short period, Laura lived in Taiwan as well. For most of her career, Laura was responsible for coordination of international projects at the Performing Arts Center Arts Printing House. Together with her colleagues, Laura has implemented a residency program for performing arts in Lithuania. In a collaboration with Norway, she has developed a long-term project exchange between the two cities, Bergen and Vilnius. Laura led the organization team for International Networks, IETM, and the THE annual meeting held at the Vilnius, the capital of culture, 2009. Welcome, Laura, and thanks for being on board with us.
For the introduction and European Culture Center for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be even online. Unfortunately, I couldn't come to real conference. As I was listening the intervention before, I thought that my time will be a bit different in terms of very practical information, like what we're doing in Embassy and Institute and how it works with the real life when we want to present photography in exhibitions, in galleries and in other projects. So first of all, I will explain my role in the embassy because Lithuanian case it's a bit different. I'm culture attaché, but I represent Culture Institute as we have just one place in Vilnius and we don't have several institutes abroad. So, and then I'm an employee of culture, the Ministry of Culture. So in terms, I represent 3 organizations, all of them are state bodies. So it's kind of difficult sometimes to work and to navigate between the embassy and what are people want to represent and what kind of culture they want to represent, then institute that I work very closely. So we have the selection process for all the projects. So all of them, they are related with the qualification in terms of presenting Lithuanian artists in some spaces that are recognized internationally, and then it gets as a qualification for the artist in some terms. We search a lot of collaboration projects, and then of course we are very willing to do always Lithuanian focus. So so in terms of all these criteria, talking about photography, it goes always for the presentation, qualification for the presentation. And then we always suggest for the organizations at least 3 photographers, 3 artists, in terms as well to be the bridge between organizations, but not to put our artistic input into artistic work, because our aim as a culture attaches, as institutes, it's to present as well. We gather some pools of the artists that are presenting one another team, but as well, it's always very important to have a freedom for the organizations to choose the artists for themselves. So in some projects, we, as I talked with Berenice before, talking what will be my point of the presentation, we talked about several examples, what happens in real life when, for example, we have quite controversial photographers that I would like to show you and to share my screen to present them. So, for example, there is Lithuanian artist Vikšraitis, as you can see him here. He is an amazing artist, but the photo that he presents, sometimes they are very, very controversial in terms of how Lithuania is presented. And when, for example, embassies are being part of some projects, photography usually is a art that is understood very directly. That, for example, what we can see in the photos it's actually how we represent our country. And then we have some difficulties in terms of, like, is it really appropriate to represent country with these photos? But on the other hand, the Lithuanian Culture Institute, or culture institutes in general, they have a much wider possibility to choose and to present and to see into photography as an art, but not as a direct country's representation. So actually, we are doing right now the project with this artist in Lithuania Island Biennale, and that was he was selected by the curators coming to Lithuania, as Lithuanian Culture Institute organizing these trips for the experts, and then they chose this artist, and we are of course very happy of that. Another artist that it seems quite very innocent in terms of presentation, of country's presentation, is Antanasutkas, very well known Lithuanian artist that we presented in various galleries, and as well with the support of Lithuania embassy or other state bodies. But sometimes we can hear that Antanasutkas is the artist that represents the period when Lithuania was in Soviet Union, our occupation, in a very romantic way. So sometimes the artistic language can be somehow put into political scope, and then have another kind of debate. But definitely, of course, this artist is really famous and represented in various countries. So we can hear other photos of him that he as well represents Lithuania in different ways. And here this one is the most famous, one of the most famous his photos that usually comes with the debate about how Lithuania is representing, about the children participating in the Soviet Union movement, and so on. Another artist that I would like to represent today is Veronica Schlievete. Actually, I found out about this artist on the day when I had a talk with Venice, and it was something unbelievable for me that we have an artist, a woman photographer that we didn't know before. And sometimes it shows how some history is hidden in different ways. And the artist, she was born on 1909, and and then she died in 1998. And recently some curators went to the local museum where they were looking at her paintings, as that Veronica Schlievete, the photographer, as we know right now, always was a painter, but the curators dig into the archive and found the photos that at that time was completely inappropriate when she was making them, because in the photos she shows the love between two women, or her dressed in a man's clothes, or presenting a church in different ways. So as well, it shows that in different periods we can discover different artists that at the moment it's like the one of the most incredible discoveries in Lithuania what we have right now. So you can see her photos that was made in the 30s, 40s, and just represents her life in in Lithuania at that time. And so it is quite famous, her portrait, as within this and this picture, she kind of even captures the performance, because this picture is titled as "I'm with the long nails," and another picture, she is cutting her nails, and it was made in the 40s. So as well, she represents herself in a very unusual way, and as that time was quite difficult to present that kind of photos, but in nowadays we are very happy to see that artist and to know more about her. So that's quite a short introduction into what artists are questionable, or not even in this kind of sense, but what questions can be raised when we are, as a embassy or institute, are presenting artists, and what discussions are in between the offices. So, but the biggest thing is, the greatest thing is that we have the institute that can represent all kind of artists, even in sometimes in the offices, in the embassies, we have some doubts. So thank you for your time, and it was a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you very much. I was saying at the very start of this afternoon session that deals with professional learning settings, that we are trying to bring different professional perspective here, and I feel it was very important to have you with us, Laura, because you are taking here, you are bringing in a perspective from a side, that of embassies, that of cultural attaché, that we are not so used to hear from. I find your short but intense speech quite interesting, because we also discussed this morning how often photography is not, considered as a mean for truth and objectivity. But your speech reminded us that with time, photography can become an heritage, especially when heading back to times when photography was inconvenient, controversial, not appropriate, as you said. So thank you a lot for this, because also it helps me to introduce our third guest, friend, Jack Capra. Jack Capra is the chief archivist for the French-American Creative Exchange and the co-founder of the Liminal Research Society and Press. His research focuses primarily on the presence of community within artistic arenas and the tensions between social and aesthetic artistic practices. Jack is currently working on the publication of a book which discusses the construction of ephemeral archives within artistic practices. Jack, thanks a lot for being here with us in Venice, and it's your turn.
Yeah. Hello, I'm excited to be here. I'm the chief archivist of the French-American Creative Exchange, which is an association that works out of the northern suburb of Paris called La Courneuve. It's an association that was founded in 2001 by an artist named Monty Laster, who moved into a previously abandoned space, an abandoned mill, and transformed it into a place for cultural exchange. Now, the problem that I'm encountering as an archivist is that Monty Laster and Face participate or exhibit works which fall into the category of social practice. And there are a lot of names for this type of practice. It's very à la mode, as we say. But I think the most important aspect of social practice is tied to Monty's understanding of representation. And we see this in the bottom quote on the screen. Monty Laster, when interviewed about one of his exhibitions, about one of his performances, his interactions, one of these exchanges, he said that if we say anything bad about the suburbs or about La Courneuve, we're stuck in stereotypes. And if we say anything good about these suburbs, we're stuck in a form of angelicism. And therefore, there is nothing that we can say at all. And so, in relation to photography, I find myself at an impasse. As an archivist that's going to be confronted with thousands of images, I'm finding myself at an impasse of trying to deal with and manage and organize the materials that don't have, the materials that are connected to works that aren't representative. And Monty describes the products of these artworks. Often these artworks are dinners, or they are based around gardening, or they are based around creating some form of communal object. That the process of these objects' creation, the process of collaboration which imbues these objects with some sort of narrative, are not the artwork themselves. That they are only the tangible witness to an artwork. That the artwork is the collaboration, that the artwork is the ethereal, the atemporal interaction between individuals. Specifically with face, it's often individuals within the community of La Courneuve. It's individuals that are otherwise not given opportunities to enunciate, not given opportunities to express themselves, that the stigmatizations of the northern suburbs of Paris speak for them. And so this term, tangible witness, this gets problematic, because if the artwork that is being created isn't physical, it's not a trace, it's not something that we can put into a gallery, but it's instead something that is existing between people, it's relational, then the photographs of these processes, the photographs that I'm dealing with as an archivist, are also not artworks. They are a form of archive of a process. And what we see here are multiple examples of different projects carried out by face in different contexts. And in each of these photos, we are confronted with a group of people in a certain setting doing certain things. Do I believe that these photos are representations of a community, or do I believe that these photos are representations of a certain area or a certain lifestyle, a certain culture? Or do I believe that these objects, or these photos, are something different? This is what I'm trying to understand as an archivist. And the way that face has contextually defined their archival work is as follows. Since 2001, face has documented its actions, exhibitions, and collaborative works by filming, photographing, recording, and archiving. This archive is kept as a memory bank of its actions and also allows the creation of a multitude of visual and sound forms telling the story of face and the many people it has collaborated with over the years. This definition of an archive to me is insufficient, because despite the works and these actions, these exhibitions, these collaborative works being documented, does not mean that they are representing the subjects in these visual forms. Julie Alt, one of my favorite artists, curators, and academics, defines the archive as being structured to represent faithfully the subjects in these photos or in these objects, but also to generate an affinity between the subjects in the photos, the structure of the archive, and the individuals that will then encounter that archive. So what I'm confronted with, and my two contentions as I'm discussing ethics in my treatment of photographs within the archives of face, is that the documentation, specifically the photography of face's actions, are indistinguishable from the artistic forms which are created as a result of social practice. These are both characterized better as traces, and in order to construct an archive which functions on a similar register to the art that it documents, the archive must resist simply representing and instead function on an enunciative or presentative register. What I think is important about social practice is that it resists representation. It's not trying to create an analogy between things, as we see often in other forms of art, especially plastic arts. There is not a representation of the community of La Courneuve that is created in the cultural exchanges. There is not a resemblance or an identity that Monty, Laster, and Face are trying to promote. They are instead saying, here, we are going to create an empty space, an opportunity for these people to speak or to present themselves. And so when I'm dealing with the photographs like the ones we just saw, I'm having to grapple with the idea that these artworks are intangible, they are not representative, but I have photographs which represent something. And so in order for me to do justice to the narratives that are contained, I believe that the archive I'm constructing needs to be different, that traditional archival methods are not sufficient for these kinds of artworks. The second contention that I have is that an archive is not predicated on the collection of materials, despite Face's statement to the contrary. It is the precise construction and the mode of employment that creates an archive. There are many modes of employment which are traditional in archival. We see them stacked away in museums or in libraries, in foundations. But within social practice, the construction of an archive must be collaborative, participatory, and the product of exchange, dialogue, and interaction with the represented subjects. The mode of employment for these archives, I think, must additionally be a product of participation, exchange, interaction, and dialogue. To get to a very precise example, these are two photos from an exhibition titled Le Monde des Bêtes, or The World of Beasts. That was, the project and the exhibition both took place in 2008. And it essentially was a group of 20 or so elementary school students went to Face's headquarters, which is based in La Courneuve, and they collected materials from around the environment and created these terrariums that we see on the right. Over the course of the school year, they cared for these terrariums, they interacted, they used them as a learning experience. The problem that I have is that on the left, I have a photo which describes or that captures the production of these terrariums. What Face and I argue is the artwork itself. On the right, we have a more traditionally understood, oh really? Okay. We have a more traditionally understood exhibition. And so between these two things, the mode of employment on the right is far more accessible, but it's also not representatory. This is not the artwork. The artwork on the right is a trace, it is a tangible witness to the process of the relational work. And just to skip ahead, I'm going to end on this. These are the current forms that image on the left and the terrariums are today. I have about 30 terabytes of photographic information, and I have 20 terrariums. In order to incorporate these two into the archive of Face, they need to be placed into a more accessible form, whether that be placing it into the schools where these terrariums were created, but also making these images more accessible. Not having them be organized by date and by project will allow us to engage on a social and relational level, that the archive of face will become an opportunity for exchange.
Well, thanks a lot, Jack. This was quite interesting for me, for a very simple reason, because at least it told me, I hope the others as well, or those who were listening to us, that the photography or the image in making, let's say, really opens up to new professionalities, as the one of the archivist. But not just that. Maybe we knew that already, no? That image making is opening new possibilities of interacting, thinking about, working with images. Well, actually, your lecture make me think is that we have a chance to renovate our range of tools. We have a chance to reinvent or enrich the definitions of our practices. You talked about empty rooms. I really like that image. You know, working with an empty rooms instead of with a given product. You know, that's what you said. And I feel this is very important. It's exciting because there's a bunch of talking about saying. I mean, we'll all heard this before. You know, photography is death. I think there is nothing. It's pretty ridiculous, and I think that your speech proves that actually there is a lot of empty room to be filled up with new, with new way of engaging with images, and this becomes more important as your practice with face, because it shows that we can use these tools to interact with communities, be inclusive, create empty rooms, create different type of archive imaginary. And I like the fact that you say that the definition of archive there is still space for increasing this space. So thank you for this. So now I have to move on to our next speaker, which is Nick Lehu. Nick has been an architectural photographer for over 25 years and a passionate observer of light, architecture, and the human condition his entire life. He's regularly commissioned to photograph some of the most significant new architecture in the world. Nick worked closely with some of the world's most respected architects, defining in photographs what makes their work unique. His work has been published regularly in every major architectural publication and in hundreds of books. His work has also been exhibited in galleries and museums internationally. So, Nick, welcome to our third International Conference on Education Photography. Thanks for being with us, and the stage is yours. Thank you. The virtual stage is yours.
Thank you, Klaus. I hope you hear me well. It's been very refreshing to hear all the previous speakers, and it's given me pause to reflect on the breadth of this concept of ethics, or the ethical concepts behind photography. It's a very wide-reaching scope of discussion. In my case, it's going to be more of a boots on the ground approach. I'm going to describe to you a specific case study, in applying photographic ethics in the field on an assignment I did several years ago in Afghanistan, photographing the largest school for girls in Afghanistan, the Gohar Katan School for Girls in Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan. I'm an architectural photographer, and I was commissioned to photograph this project. And I decided, as part of this, because I'm very much in the social documentary work as much as architectural photography, I decided to turn this into a parallel personal project that would discuss or show through imagery the ideas that we're all intertwined together as a community. So the school is actually part of Mazar-e-Sharif, and Mazar-e-Sharif is a reflection on the school. Mazar-e-Sharif is a city of approximately 500,000 people in northern Afghanistan. And so that set the stage for my process in 2 weeks in Mazar-e-Sharif, Afghanistan. Initially, I wanted to lay the groundwork for what I was actually going to be doing at the school. So I spent some time in the city documenting the actual state of what it was. It's a very poor city, as you can see, and it's fairly representative of most cities in Central Asia that have gone through ups and downs, and certainly 25 years of war has left its mark on Mazar. This is the Blue Mosque, which is the best known element of Mazar-e-Sharif, and frankly, definitely not representative of the rest of the city, which is quite poor. There are signs of modern construction, but generally it's the city that has definitely suffered through these decades of war and problematic issues. There are signs everywhere of police and army interaction, because as we all know, these images were photographed in 2015, and we were in the midst of maybe a clearing in the clouds where things were a little bit mellower, and we had an opportunity to go in and photograph this project. But this gives you a taste of what the city is all about. And it's important for me as a photographer to actually spend time and to really, if it's a country that I'm not particularly well aware of, to really get a sense of what the people are all about, get a sense of the culture. And it requires days walking the city and days capturing, day-to-day elements of what the city is all about and what it stands for, and certainly getting a vibe of what it's all about. We all know that cities are very different, even if they're sometimes very close geographically. So these initial images are kind of a preamble to the concept of pushing the boundaries that I spoke above. That's a reference to the young women that we're going to meet in a few minutes. You can see how this young gentleman here on the lower left, who's aiming a fake AR-15 at me or Kalashnikov at me, has been influenced by years of warfare in his life. This is a little bit setting the stage for what I would see in this entire trip. That the wounds of war and the wounds left behind are palpable in all stages of the documentation that I'm going to show you coming up. Part of my documentation was also implementing some concepts of vertical integrality in photography. And I'm always interested, if I'm photographing a project, to document the periphery of it. Let me explain a little more. In this case, the school itself was interesting, but it's also interesting to me to document the builders who actually were in charge or were responsible for construction of the school. So I decided to, and this was mixed in with my idea of communicating the true nature of Mazar-e-Sharif as a city, as an entity. So I went to all the neighborhoods in Mazar that had done the steel work on the school, that had done the brick work on the school, and that had done the cement work, and even the wood structural work. And I started seeing a certain theme that, again, started bringing to mind the concept of having to be somewhat ethical in my representation of things. But it's a line of thought that is always in the back of my mind as a photographer. You'll notice here that there's men in their 30s and 40s who are showing young boys who are 6 to 8 years old how to weld and how to build things and how to become part of the manhood that they're going to be. And this is inevitable because as a young man in Mazar-e-Sharif, you have very little chance of education, and you're going to be a child laborer from the age of 5 or 6. And this brings to mind, the idea that a photographer has the duty to present their subject in a way that is responsible and also respectful. So you're having to build a rapport with your subject. It's a tenuous relationship for a photographer to land in an area, in a neighborhood where there's a language communication problem. I unfortunately do not speak Farsi, and it was very hard for me to actually be able to communicate with them except for in a visual manner. So you get there and you basically let them know by body language and by a certain visual contact that your intentions are noble. And, you know, within a few minutes, this rapport is built. You bring your camera up to your eye and they start doing their thing, and you create a tenuous relationship that will essentially form the basis for the documentation that you're going to do. And, you know, I'm a father of a 9-year-old daughter, and I can't, you know, of course, I'm looking at these images right now, and I see that if this was my child, you know, there would, your heart is tugging at these kids, realizing that their opportunities are so much more limited than the ones that we have in the West. So I'm coming at it from the perspective of a Westerner, with the eyes of a Westerner, but I'm trying to bring a human notion of what they're dealing with, as within my perspective, from the way that their life is going forward. These are cement workers, and they're actually crushing limestone to create cement. And this young man is probably 15 years old, but I'm sure he's been working in this cement yard for at least 7 or 8 years. A woodworker who's showing a young apprentice how to actually carve up some structural pieces of wood that will form the backbone of a building like the school in Mazar-e Sharif at Gohar, Katan. A brick factory, which is extremely cinematic, and there's this gloss of the beauty, the natural beauty of what you're seeing. It's but it's almost a Kafka-esque scene as well, in the sense that if you look at the details and you realize the working conditions of these people, it's far from the actual beauty of the image. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy that you're fighting. I can't say that I wasn't excited about photographing this space. You know, it was an incredibly beautiful place to photograph, this brick factory. But at the same time, you know, you've got a tug of war going in your heart and your mind, the natural beauty. And as a photographer, you're there to capture that beauty and that tell a story with these images. But at the same time, you're conscious of the issues with which these people grapple on a day-to-day basis. These gentlemen are shoveling coal. It happens to be fairly reasonably warm that day. It was probably about 25 degrees Celsius, but it gets up to 30 degrees, 35 degrees Celsius, working in these coal and brick factories. So quite difficult conditions to contend with. So this gentleman to me represented human dignity. You know, he's been working all day in these fields, and it's the end of the day. It's about 5 p.m., when I'm photographing this. And I'm suspecting he's been working at least 12 hours at this brick factory and taking a break before going home, covered in clay. I think this image kind of represents to me the idea of having respect for your subject. And it's been spoken of in a few other speakers before, that it's important for us as photographers and people who are in the field of visual communication to have a sense of empathy and understanding and respect for the subject matter that you're working with. In my case, it's actually very self-serving, and it's not intentionally self-serving, but certainly if you build a visual rapport, as I did with this gentleman, and we exchange nonverbal communication for a few minutes, you get a better image. You will be able to better represent where they stand for, because they will be more open to what you're doing. They'll be more open to give themselves to what you are doing specifically. These are workers at the end of a very long day. It's about 7 p.m. at this point, and they're just taking a break before going home. And I should state that for them, home is literally the yards behind the brick factory, little mud cabins. Let's get to the meat of this subject matter here. This is the Gohar Katan School for Girls in Afghanistan. So I've spent a week photographing the city and the workers, and I've got a better understanding of what Mazar is all about. This is the school within the context of the city. These are the girls lining up at the gates to get into the school in the morning. The gates are very well protected, and the girls are in a bit of an oasis once they cross that gate, that threshold. You can see the girls here in the back streets walking towards school, getting ready for their day. And the little girls here are herded together with their perfect backpacks and headscarves, and it's a very idyllic scene. However, it reflects a certain rigor, to say the least, in their lives that really constricts them from what anybody would consider freedom outside of Afghanistan. However, once the gates of the school are open, they're within that schoolyard, it's a whole different scene. Here they are coming in, and once they're in that school environment, they can basically open themselves up. And it was a palpable sense, actually, once I was there. I could feel that there was a lot of closeness and a camaraderie, and they had a sense that they were pushing the boundaries and changing things within the confines of the school. This is the morning meetings, and of course these silk, beautiful silk drapes were set up because of the heat that morning. But this is the first week of opening of the school, so there was quite a bit of celebration involved, and this is a case in point. And you're always fighting with the tug of war of course, protection. This is a case study of, again, how a school is basically an oasis as much as anything else, and this oasis has to be protected. This gentleman here, who's from the Afghan army, is offering an explicit protection to the girls, because you're always reminded when you're in the school and when you're around the school that there are forces that would rather not this exist, and that women's education is not seen as something that is not only valuable, but it's actually seen as a threat. So you're always dealing with military presence, and you are always reminded of this very delicate alliance between, definitely a delicate alliance with education that the girls have. It's their schoolyard. Every morning they have a bit of a ritual of pumping water. It's a well-driven system, so they pump the waters to the tanks, and they take their turns to pump water to the tanks that will feed the bathrooms and the hydration for them during the day. And it becomes a ritual that they engage in fully. It becomes almost part of their curriculum. And then they go to class, and they learn to become entire human beings, and they become, empowered young women. They're pushing the boundaries of what it is to be a woman in Afghanistan. And I'm speaking to you right now, and I'm actually having the hair on the back of my neck rise, because I remember the feeling of being in this room and saying, this is actually historical, because there are 5,000 women in this school who are changing the character of a city of 500,000 people. It's not an inconsiderable amount of women here, and they will change the society of at least the Balkh province where Mazar-e-Sharif is located, as long as they get a proper education that will get them into a post-secondary situation. So this young girl is maybe 8 years old here, and she's learning, and at this stage today, she's 15 or 16 years old. Of course, we know what's happened in the last year. So I'm also looking at these images with a lot of, I guess, tension in my heart, or a sense of wondering where they are all now. The first day I was actually at the school, I didn't actually have my camera with me. You can imagine what it's like for a white man to enter a school with 5,000 young Afghani women. They have to understand that, again, I'm going to use this line, that my intentions are noble, and that I fully intend to represent them in the best light possible. And, I think that it was successful because, again, I would jokingly try to make some rapport with them as the day went on, and they kind of pointed at me, and I'm sure they had a nickname for me within a day or so. But that's part of the fun, and it's part of releasing the tension and getting me an opportunity to photograph some interesting shots. For example, setting up an impromptu soccer game with the girls, and again with the help of their teachers. This was quite a tremendous afternoon, frankly, and it gave an amazing opportunity for photography. Again, the Quran is always present in their life, and it's an inevitable part of their day-to-day existence. One thing that I found fascinating is the next session of images is going to show how there was a group of girls who were wearing their full headscarf, and knowing that I was photographing them and having been with them at this point, they'd seen me for 3 or 4 days around the school. And the young group of girls here were looking at me, and they were questioning themselves. Should we or should we not? Do you think we should do this or should we not do this? And what they were referring to is the opportunity to remove your headscarf, which is an absolute no-no in Afghanistan. But within the confines of the school, they felt empowered enough to do this. So I was privy to a pretty amazing scene where they actually, some of the more temporary girls actually started to remove their headscarf as a form of representation of who they were. These two were fully scarved initially, and you can see the second girl from the right was the first one to remove her headscarf and show her hair and her face. And then here they are having a conversation about, do you think I'm going to get in trouble, or should we do this? And her friend did it afterwards. So you're actually helping them. I hope you're helping them express themselves as who they are. But it shows how there's a invisible link between a photographer and his subject. In this case, it was obviously a representation of several days of building a rapport together. These are a series of portraits of a teacher, great teacher at that school, and some of the students of different ages. These are young Uzbek women who go to the school on the opening day of school, wearing their traditional outfits. And these were the situations or the conditions under which the young women had to study before this new school was built. So in a precarious building that had been abandoned, frankly. I'm going to finish off with something that's in line with the School for Girls. It's a process or a project that was put in place by the Goethe Institute or parrainé or sponsored by the Goethe Institute in Germany. It's Skateistan. Skateistan is an opportunity. It's a space for young women in Mazar to learn how to skateboard. And it's these young men are contributing to the advancement of that, and they are teachers. They're progressives, and they're teaching the girls how to skateboard. And they're very proud of it. And they're proud of the progressive element of what they're bringing to Afghanistan. So it's funny because we get a very one-dimensional perspective of men in Afghanistan and women in Afghanistan as Westerners, and you realize that it's a more complicated story. There's more gray than black and white. It's not to say that there is not atrocities committed by men, because there are. Thankfully, there's a few gentlemen like these guys here who are empowered to empower young women. And these young women are pushing the boundaries again in a country that would not have them do what they want to do. There's a real sense of freedom when you're in the space of Skateistan, that these girls come into the rooms and put their equipment on, get their shoes on, get their skateboards. And you can see it in her eyes, the pride of who she is, the pride of what she's doing, standing under the Afghan flag as an empowered young woman who's learning to be who she is through skateboarding. And this is the facility that they use, and here they are going at it. It's a very small representation of forces of change that can generally, hopefully, change things long term. And again, it's hard for us to look at these images and with knowing what's been going on in the last several months. It brings another point of ethics that I wanted to bring up in closing. These images show the faces of these young women and puts them at risk. And I'm going to share something with you today. You're the first group of people who've had the chance, I hope, to see these images as a whole, because for 6.5 years, I've actually, out of an ethical consideration for their safety, I've actually not shown them. I'm hoping this is the start of a series of exhibits and potentially a book that will help to further their cause in a very tenuous situation right now. But this is part of the whole story of ethics as a whole. And what do you do with these images, knowing that they can be used as a force for good, but also used as a force for bad? So it's always in the back of mind as you're in the process of photographing this story and other stories like it. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Nick, also for sharing with us this long-term commitment and photographic work you've done in a very sensitive context, I would say, and that becomes more and more meaningful as we read the news.
Yes.
You also reminded me of what we have debated this morning about the right distance when you're taking pictures. We understood that it's not just a physical distance, but it's more and more a cultural distance. And this is taking me to say that maybe we should talk about the right attitude in photography rather than the right distance, because attitude brings in questions such as empathy and respect that you have widely talked about in your speech. So thanks very much, Nick, for sharing with us your experience and contributing to our conference. Now it's time for me to introduce our last speaker of this afternoon session, right before entering the question and answer time. So our last speaker is Florence Manuguerra. Florence Manuguerra lives in Paris, France, and founded the Caring Gallery with 25 years of experience in the art and business world. She was Director of Development at Beaux-Arts Institute after having founded and directed for 11 years an art and cultural consultancy for brands La Compagnie. She created numerous experiences allowing different audiences to discover contemporary art and meet artists and art experts. Prior to that, she spent 9 years in the marketing and advertising departments of the PSA Peugeot Citroën Group. The Caring Gallery is an artistic and humanistic project that synthesizes her values and her way of looking at entrepreneurship. Welcome, Florence. Thanks for being with us this afternoon and for sharing your experience of the Caring Gallery with all of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Steve, for that introduction. And thank you also to Klaus Pruschnik for his invitation to participate to this very interesting day of exchanges. Do you see my presentation? Yes? Okay. So I'm based in Paris, and it is there that I created a new art gallery last May, which is based on the care ethic. That's what I'm going to talk about today. How the care ethic can transform the way we sell art. The real issue is how a gallery can today put ethics at the heart of its commercial economic model and thus play a positive role in the dynamics of transformations that our societies need. The Caring Gallery is a gallery born this year, that is to say only 9 years before the 2030 deadline set by the UN to achieve the 17 goals for building a more sustainable and fairer world. So the caring gallery therefore belongs to this very particular period in which we are projecting ourselves into the world after versus the world before. It's really a gallery at the service of transition. So change the world by art. This is the baseline we have chosen to sum up our vocation. It may sound very pretentious because we are only 6 months old. So we are a baby and we want to change the world. But I think an entrepreneur has that in common with an artist, that they want to bring something new. And I'm 50 years old and I have 3 children, 2 adults who belong to the COVID generation and a little girl of 8. So frankly, I couldn't see myself starting a new business the way I've done in the past, in the traditional way, and saying to them, here, I'm going to sell art and just to make money. The current environmental and societal challenges of poverty, exclusion, and rising discrimination are such that every company has a duty to put the common good at the heart of its concerns and to ask itself how it can have a virtuous impact on its ecosystem. So yes, the Caring Gallery's vocation is to change the world, and this is what we will guide its choices. As you can see on the slide, we believe that this is precisely what people are waiting for, to be able to make their taste for art a gesture that counts in the service of their values, their commitments as citizens and human beings concerned about the fate of the planet. We address individuals who want to create a work of art that is meaningful to them, or who want to meet artists who share their values and their responsible commitments, but also responsible companies with ambitious corporate social responsibility strategy, because they are decisive players in facing today's challenges. So in France, in 2019, a law was passed, the Pacte Law, which allows companies to write their raison d'être, that we can translate by purpose, in their articles of association. This is very important because it means that a commercial company like us today can exist also for something other than making a profit. We are the first company in the French art market to adopt this status. This raison d'être will guide all our actions, and first and foremost, our exhibition themes, which will focus on today's major environmental and societal issues: the climate challenge, the preservation of biodiversity, the fight against social exclusion, sexism or racism, the promotion of education and integration, and the defense of human rights. So how we will concretely activate this raison d'être, make it tangible, embody it, what will be the common thread of our actions? This is where the ethic of care will play a very important role. So what is the care ethic? Historically, care is an ethic of fairly recent Anglo-Saxon origin, born in 1982 in the United States, with a publication of a study by the philosopher Carol Gilligan, who linked it to a very feminist point of view through the historical role of women in the activity of care, for example, in hospitals and so on. Then in 1993, the American philosopher John Tronto published a political argument for an ethic of care. And on the Caring Gallery website, I wanted to include her definition of care, and you can read it there. Activity characteristic of the human species, which covers everything we do in order to maintain, perpetuate, and repair our world, so that we can live in it as well as possible. This world includes our bodies, our people, and our environment, all that we seek to link together in a complex network in support of life. With this definition, there are 3 main things to remember about the ethic of care. Firstly, care sees fragility as intrinsic of human nature. Each of us carries frailties and flaws, or will face life experiences that will affect us and sometimes bring us down. They are not strong on the one side and the weak on the other. Recognizing fragility as the constituent element of each individual's functioning, but also recognizing as normal the fragility of nature and of all living things, animals and so on, means making it a key factor in our collective functioning. Whereas liberalism makes vulnerability a factor of weakness or failure, which must therefore be corrected, the care ethic places it at the heart of our social link. Fragility and vulnerability belong to our individual and collective identity. As an entrepreneur, I was particularly interested in this concept because from there, we can reflect on how to ensure that the fragility and vulnerability of nature, of women, of men, and all of living things are no longer driving force for social exclusion, discrimination, or the destruction of value, but on the contrary, are recognized as being able to create social links and new sources of innovation and wealth. The second very important point is that with care, we do things with the others and not for the other. There is a reciprocity, and care places a fragile person in an active position. They receive help, but in exchange, they are not passive. They act to get out of this situation of dependence and regain their autonomy, their freedom of action. And this is in this interaction and this posture of reciprocity that the carer finds his own place. One no longer looks away, one no longer changes the pavement saying to oneself, I'm not concerned, or I can do nothing about it. We no longer pass by because the other, in his fragility, speaks to me of mine and reminds me that one day I too will need help. Finally, the third important point, care is different from charity. Charity does not aim at efficiency. One helps one's neighbor, regardless of the outcome. Care, on the other hand, is concerned with the impacts that our action will have. For example, for our exhibition, first exhibition, Rêvons à des jours meilleurs, Dreaming of Better Days, which you can see in the visuals, we choose this theme, Dreaming of Better Days, and 10% of the sales were donated to an association that helps young people in precarious situations. The needs have been identified by the association, they are concrete, and the actions carried out are also concrete and carried out to be effective. It is not just about giving, no matter what it's for. This slide is a very brief introduction to care, but I really invite you to do your own reading and research to find out more about care. The idea of the Caring Gallery is to combine the power of care with the power of the arts. So you all know this if you are here, so I will quickly go over this point, but the arts have the power to challenge us, to make us curious about subjects that do not concern us directly. They make us empathetic because they allow us to feel, to be moved. So they activate our two hemispheres of the brain. I choose to illustrate this with a photograph by the artist Randa Maroufi, who has replaced men with women in everyday scenes. Of course, there is a feminist discourse behind this approach, but the singularity of this photo challenges us and make us aware of the problem from a certain angle. So for me, art and care are the two essential ingredients to avoid falling into the worst scenario, that of indifference to what does not directly concern us. So now, how can we make these ingredients active together and at the service of a positive impact? This is where the way the Caring Gallery works will play an important role. So how can an art gallery become an impact player? First of all, our exhibitions are thematic exhibitions that focus solely on environmental and societal issues and will offer the public the singular view of artists on these issues. Secondly, to create these exhibitions, we want to work with artists who feel particularly concerned by the major contemporary challenges. Artists who are committed to the climate challenge, social exclusion, discrimination, or human rights. You will tell me that all artists are concerned by the world around them. It is even the nature of an artist, but let's say that there are some who do so in a particularly sincere and active way, or who are in a position that places them at the heart of a care approach. I am thinking, for example, of migrant artists who are in exile. Finally, we propose to NGOs and charities to fully integrate our economic model by associating them with 10% of our art sales. It is therefore an economic model with impact. Tripartite, artist, NGO, and gallery, and no longer just an artist-gallery pairing that we are proposing. This has never been done before, at least not in France. And if you have any information on other galleries like us, do not hesitate to tell me. This has a direct financial impact. The idea is to share the value we create, not only with our employees and shareholders, but also with those who need help in our society or who are acting for the environment. It is about affirming that the vulnerability of others concerns us and engage us collectively. We are in this together. These are the three pillars on which we will base our impact strategy. Voila. Thank you very much for your attention, and please don't hesitate to contact me, because in order to change the world, the Caring Gallery is going to need artists, experts, care experts, partners, and investors. So I hope to see you soon, and I am at your disposal to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence. Thank you for bringing in another perspective to our debate. So now we have about half an hour time for question and answer time. Meanwhile, I've received already a few questions, so I will try to share with you. And of course, everybody is welcome to bring his own point to the question. So I will start with Nick. I have a question for Nick, saying, considering your project on the schools for girls in Afghanistan and considering the current situation there, have you ever thought to go back now and document the same topic after the last political facts? Is the school still open? Well, I guess this is quite a challenging question for the times we are facing now.
Yeah, it's a really very good point. And I'll be honest, this photo essay did not happen in a vacuum. There were other people involved who are now back in North America or in Europe, and you can just imagine the WhatsApp and the text conversations we've had in the last several months. I wish I could say that on top of mind, my idea has been to go back, because it's certainly in the back of my mind. However, what's been most pressing in the last 2 or 3 months has been getting people out of Afghanistan, people who were collaborators with Americans, with the Germans, with the Czech armies, people who were translators, people who were collaborators, Afghanis who were collaborators with the UN. A lot of these people are now in very precarious situations. Educators, the director of the school, of the Gohar Katan school, people involved in the Sahara Foundation who funded the construction of the school, all Afghanis, all progressives, all under the, unfortunately now, the dark cloud of the Taliban. So it's the pressing issue. As of August 21, or August 31, I should say, the school closed temporarily. The Taliban have said in communiques that they intend to allow women's education to go on, but I believe this was just hot air. I don't think it was true. Most of us don't. So truthfully, there's no short-term future for the school, and it's very heartbreaking, as you can imagine. And that's what I was talking about a little bit. You do get connected to these people. So that's the long answer. The short answer is, I would love to go back and photograph the school, and I'd love to photograph, more importantly, these young women and where are they now, 7 years later. I hope it happens in the next few years. My fingers are crossed.
Anyhow, I have a question for you, asking how does ethics relate with the way the embassy, or in general a cultural institution, decides to support projects dealing with a specific type of issues, such as gender, religion, and other sensitive, I would say, issues? So if I can add something, maybe what type of criteria comes into, into the game when you have to decide upon such of works that deal with such sensitive issues?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the beginning because it was not possible to hear, but I think the main question is about the criteria. Do we have in general that kind of thing? So mostly it's very personal thing. It's like for cult attaché, and for me, like being a president of institute and cult attaché, I and my colleagues, we do not have any kind of criteria, because like we represent professional culture and art. But sometimes, as what I've said before as well, it's things that it's in between the lines, and that's really talking about the reality, because maybe you couldn't find it written in some papers or documents. So it really depends on the personalities. And if we're talking about the embassy, mostly of the ambassador, the head of the office. So how it's presented, or do we have in general raised these questions? But in latest days, it's definitely that when we are talking about presenting the artists, so we look mostly not about the gender question, but as well about the age, because Lithuania in the latest years was really focused on young artists. That of course it's logical, because we want to help the young generation. But as looking into our history, we have a mid-career gap, that these artists sometimes they have some difficulties to be presented abroad, because they don't know the language, because the language that they learned at school, it was Russian, and now if we are talking to present your work internationally, so it's very important to know English. So we look definitely into a lot of questions, present the artist, but in the what is in the photos, if we're talking about photography, and what is in the inside, what art is talking about. It depends on the artists and on the organizations who are inviting them, because our role is to be a bridge between the artists and art organization abroad, in my case it's Italy, and how we can help to meet them and to have projects or presentations together. So that's what I can share right now.
Well, thanks a lot again, Laura. Jack, I have an interesting question now here for you, saying within today's topic, of course, how your organization prevents instrumentalization of representation regarding the artwork, communities, or even action with the other. As an archivist, you are the one who decides what narrative creates memory.
Yeah, that's when I started working on preparing for this. That was the question I started with: was who am I to create these narratives, and who is Face or Monty Laster to create these narratives and engage and represent these communities? And I want to go back to that idea of something being empty, in that in every action that Face engages with, the idea of the other doesn't really exist, because Face, well, Monty Laster as an artist is a fascinating individual, and he's been in La Courneuve for 20 years. You know, he had an international exhibition at Palais de Tokyo, he's widely known, but he still lived in La Courneuve. He never left. And so for him to be out of, or not a part of, despite him not being French, not born in that area, the definition of community changes. And so when we talk about a representation of the other, I think the audience is more, that's where we get this tension. Mm-hmm. So who is going to be looking at the archive? Who is going to be looking at the interventions or the exchanges that Face is creating? To me, that's the tension between the audience looking at the other. Mm-hmm. And my struggle as an archivist is the presentation of these narratives in the most unbiased way. Do I concern myself more with representing faithfully the materials and the stories and the narratives of these communities, or instead trying to generate affinity between these people? And I liked what you said, Laura, about building bridges, that if I could create some form of archive that is illegible, or that it's not necessarily important, the structure, but it creates some form of dialogue or narrative between two different groups of people, two different kinds of representation, that to me is where the artwork is located and the importance is located. That Face, to function ethically, is not to put itself above what it's creating. That the community it's part of and the community that it's not representing but creating a space for is the priority in any part of the process. And as I build this archive and go through these images, I constantly question my authority as someone who can present these subjects. I don't know these people. I'm very new to the project. But I think that organizing it in such a way that the structure of the archive is as invisible as possible allows people to present themselves rather than me representing them.
Well, I really like, you stumble upon often about this idea of intangible results of what we do, actually. And this actually is leading me to another question, this time for Laura Davì, which again, I think relates to the question of who is our audience, and how do we relate with our audience. So Laura, I have a question saying, as a photo editor in this case, as you have a long experience as a photo editor in Italy, you also speak about the truth and how people decide on what narrative is shared and what is ethically correct to share with others. So how, in your experience as a photo editor, when you had to choose ethically what was correct to share or not to share, how did you cope with it type of issues?
Okay, thank you for question. it's not easy to answer. Let me think about, because how can I say? We've seen so many images, violent images, that to me, they are almost at the level of pornography. Because there is a use of these images that really is near pornography. Who remember the name of the little child with the red t-shirt dead on the sand on a beach 2 or 3 years ago? Who remember his name? But we all remember that image. But I'm not sure the message goes by that kind of images. Then, in another way, we all remember Abu Ghraib images. Okay, that images started a process, sorry for my English, it's very terrible, a process against police violence on people who was retained in that jail. So in that case, to me, it has a good, okay, they were okay. Okay, but I mean, do you know there is a group in Lesbos Island in Greece. Do you know Moria? Something like that is the name. They are an Afghan refugee and Iraqi refugees working with the same refugees and trying to let these people have a voice. I'm sorry, I don't remember right now the exact name. I'm really sorry. We all must know this reality, because these, for me, is the way. But in what we see is what I say before. We are used to see a kind of images, and we are not able to recognize new, different ways to show the same violence. So I was with people, colleagues, looking at images selection in the selection for a prize, an award, and there were passing images, these bloody, murderly images. I was working with Federico Vespignani, so I knew that reality very well, and I say, but how can it be that a photograph is near a man with a gun pointed at the head or another in that way? There is something wrong. Yeah, they were staged, but nobody was questioning, because we are so used to see this kind of images. I don't know if I can make you understand what I wanna tell. It makes sense?
But it also raise other questions, which is always good. So I will turn this question to all the speakers of this afternoon session, because what Laura just said makes me wonder about what's then the exit strategy to avoid this slipping into what Laura called, let's say, pornography. You know, how do we exit from this risk? You know, and I'm wondering if the practice of photography should become then more inclusive, participatory. Jack has talked about the kind of experience that moves in this type of direction. There are still a lot of difficulties and questions. So I ask every one of you, what's in from your perspective, the exit strategy from this risk? If there's any, of course.
Yeah, I may want to start on this. I think that as a photographer, and I alluded to this a little bit when I spoke, you have to really respect the subject matter. You have to have the empathy of the subject matter that you're dealing with, whatever it is, whoever it is. I think photographers, as other creatives, are very sensitive to the environment they're in, and that has to transcend to the people that you're documenting. I think there is a segment of photographers, as you mentioned, Laura, who are about sensationalism, and they're trying to generate an image that's going to give them X million hits on Instagram or whatever. And unfortunately, that is the sournois. I don't know what the English word is, but it's the unfortunate aspect of photography that's become very commodified in the last 20 years. I think if we need to look back on, we need to look back on history a little bit, how there's always been an understanding within the world of photography that the images actually do make a difference and that they are important. You also alluded to the fact that there's so many images out there these days, and it's true. And when you get bombarded by the number of images that we get bombarded by these days, you lose track of the real power of the image, and therefore you lose track of the responsibility of the image in telling a story. As a side note, I'd like to bring up an important statistic that I heard a few years ago. Since the advent of social media, every year there are as many images produced as the entire history of photography before that year. So for example, in 2021, there will be as many photographs taken as there were taken between 1838 and 2020. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the sheer number of images that we're dealing with. So I think if photographers, and let me just get away from it and let other people speak, but I think if photographers understand their role, so it's an educational thing, it's a self-awareness thing, it's an understanding of the gravitas of what you bring when you're taking an image and you're sharing it with the world. And it comes from a place of self-knowledge, of respect of your subject again, and education, and doing your homework.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, I think, and this was talked about in the morning session, this idea of the truth of a photo, and trying to get to some idea of the truth of a photograph. And I think we live in a time where identity is so important, but also we're so skeptical of representation that finding a way out from that is complicated. And for me, engaging with someone, when someone tells me, oh, this photograph represents X, Y, and Z, I find myself skeptical of, one, that person's ability to tell me what that photograph means, but two, where is that photo being placed? If I'm in an art gallery, why is it there, and why is it representing that in the art gallery? If this event exists somewhere in the world, how do I engage with this photo in a way that changes the thing that's represented? I think that leaning towards something that not is necessarily participatory or even truthful, but something that is authentic, and having that be the goal of leaning towards a shift of an aesthetic authenticity. That maybe this isn't true. I don't think that the photographs I work with on a day-to-day basis reflect anything that is true. And the way that the photographs I worked with are stored, there are a lot of them that are mixed up. And no one knows what art project or what engagement, what year they came from. And so when I'm engaging with these images, I'm not necessarily looking for a truth. I'm looking to construct something authentic that reflects the reality that in which they were created. And when I engage with images, I'm wanting to be moved by an authenticity. And I think that that can be a goal of photography. And the medium is incredibly important. I mean, you brought up Instagram, but even a publication or going into an archive. When I was in New York, the archive that I was working with, I felt very disconnected from the subject material, and I was, holding the original images. So in what way can we reconnect the engagement of these photographs to their subjects?
Thanks.
Sorry, I wanna tell you the name. I forget before. It was, you can say, I'm sorry again. Now you see me Moria. Now you see me Moria. It's really, really interesting.
Well, is there anyone who would like to add anything to this exit strategy? Otherwise, we will exit now from our afternoon session. And I would like, of course, to thank and acknowledge all our speakers, Jack, Laura, and Nick, and Florence. Before ending this first day of conference, I would like to remind you briefly, the program of tomorrow. We are gonna host 4 panels, 2 in the morning, starting from 11, and 2 in the afternoon. The panels are moderated, and this is something new, by 4 finalists of previous edition of Blurring the Lines program. And I'd like to mention them: Jonna Brøsma, Alexandra Maldonado, Dan Rusker, and sorry, I'm missing the first one, and Ragnar Ard Maric. They're gonna debate with about 25 of this year finalists of Blurring the Lines around topics related, of course, to ethical shift in photography. And so they will discuss about reciprocity in cultural context, social media implications, the role of the audience, and finally, the ethical range, or rather the definitional range of ethics in photography. So this will be the program for tomorrow. So I will thanks everyone who contributed to this first day of conference, and thanks to everybody who has been following us along the day. I would like to remind you, of course, that all the registration, everything has been recorded, so it's going to be available online on the YouTube page of ECC. And of course, then after the conference, we will start our huge work of building the proceeding of the conference, but this is another goal. So thank you again, thanks everybody, and see you then tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.